Hello everyone, and welcome to Andrew Broussard of Watercolors. Today I'm going to do a fast and loose tonalist watercolor painting based on a photograph. How close to the photograph I wind up getting, or if I even stay within the bounds of it, I'm not sure, but I feel like I have a little bit of artist block, and I figured that this might cure it. So right here, I'll put a picture of the picture that I'm painting from, and then I'll post somewhere in the video, wherever it would fit on the screen, the results, so you can see what it's going to look like as I paint it. And if you like it, and if you want to follow along with it, I'll put some downloadables up on the Patreon, which I'll link down below. So this is a quarter sheet of Stonehenge Aqua. I'm saturating it completely with water. It's 100% cotton, and it is a 140-pound cold press. And I was just kind of going through photos that I had taken. This probably dates back to the summer of either 2019 or 2000, yeah, probably 2019, over near Pumping Plant Road, from maybe a bike ride trip. So anyway, let's get started. I'm going to use the large, medium hake brush, and I'll probably base it around the sap green Venetian red combination. I haven't used that in a while, but I'm also thinking about burnt umber and the raw umber, just reflecting on some different two-color combinations that I've been playing around with. And the fast and loose style, the tonalist style, is derived from a YouTube painter, a tonalist painter, Stuart Davies, who does this in oil painting, a back and forth kind of wax on, wax off type style. All right, so let's just kind of go to it. I think I'll start with the burnt umber, just to maybe map out what I'm working with. The fun thing about this tonalist fast and loose wiping back and forth is that you really have a lot of creativity, a lot of experimentation that you're allowed to do, and it really is just a great exercise in relaxation. The bad thing, if we're going to talk negatives, is that since we're working straight from the tube, we are using a large quantity of pigment, but it does go a long way, the tubes. And depending on the mixtures that you're using, you can get a tonal shift, a drying shift, where everything lightens up as you dry. So it might be deceptively dark, and where you want it to be tonally, however, due to the drying, everything starts to lighten up. So experiment with different color combinations and see what you like, and be aware of what happens. I believe Ranson, in his watercolor painting books, will often refer to demonstrating Payne's Gray and putting Payne's Gray in a watercolor in a sky, and the crowd, the people watching, would gasp at the large quantity that he'd put in. But due to the drying shift and his awareness of it, it mellowed out as it dried, and it just fit the sky perfectly. So that's part of the thing of practicing, is learning how everything's going to react. So this is just burnt umber. Let's grab some raw umber. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think I explored this combination, and it really just worked out so well. The textures, I wound up using it as a profile picture on Facebook. I just loved the results. This is kind of a cooler type green, cooler type earth tone, I think of it as a green. If I was to use it in oils, I found that I would use it in the background of a still life. It doesn't get used often, but it does have its place. And that's the raw umber that I'm talking about. This photo that I had taken, down in Louisiana we have the ditches for the runoff from the rain, and to kind of help with flooding. And there's this metal bridge that these people, I'm not sure if it's a footbridge or for cars, because some of the houses there will have it where they could pass the car, and then there'll still be the ditch and then a place for them to walk over. But this house, the road that it's on, is parallel to the Vermilion River, and I'm sure that this house, this area, would be prone to flooding. I'm tempted to leave the white of the sky. I think I will do that. Let's get some sap green and Venetian red out. That's the mixture I would usually start with originally with these experiments. And then I had gone on to the phthalo mixtures with the quinacridone rose. That had worked so well. It was just really beautiful mixture. Then from there, just been playing with a lot of double 2-color paintings, 3-color paintings, and just exploring beautiful palettes. So this mixture of Venetian red and the sap green will push back and forth from red and green and brown. Over the burnt umber, however, it seems to be pushing a lot more green, which I'm surprised. Now, I'm not sure how the camera is picking it up. I use my cell phone to film it, and sometimes it'll push it a little bit browner. But it does have a little bit of a Christmas tree type vibe. But I'm pretty certain that it won't remain like that. With the shape of trees, I found that I have to be really cautious, where I'll want to continue and kind of get that outside edge of those trees going, and I'll work it a little bit more, and then suddenly I fill up the whole page with trees with that tree. It just wants to creep out larger and larger. Whenever you're aware of your shortcomings with painting, that's probably where you progress the most. I threw some more burnt umber on there, building up that dark shadow. There's that house right there, but I believe I'm going to leave that out. It might make its way in. We'll see. Someone recently on the Ranson Facebook page group had posted a painting where, I think the painting was a commissioned painting. I think it was Martin Nicasse that had shared it, and had posted how the person had requested something very vibrant with colors, and that painting was so vibrant And a lot of the times, and this is going to sound narcissistic, I think as a painter, we then reflect about our own paintings and how vibrant and colorful that painting was. There was such twinges of jealousy that I had, where I paint so dark and moody that I struggle immensely with these traditional bright and cheery watercolors. And Martin had knocked that painting out of the park. It just looked absolutely beautiful. So you know, I guess that kind of goes into being aware of your shortcomings with paintings, and challenging yourself. Once in a while, I do like to try those out. Okay, I'm going to take a paper towel and lift out some textures. The paper is entirely saturated with water and pigment, and lifting is going to pull moisture out of that spot. If we decide to go back in with the hake brush, or if we go with the rigger, these areas won't have water in them. We can either re-add it with the hake brush with large textures with stippling, or we can leave them wet, dry. But just be aware of how we're changing the moisture here. And using the paper towel, you always want to be careful of repetition. Same thing with the hake brush, where it may potentially create that stamping effect, and it has that same pulling shape. So roll the paper towel in your hand and get different edges on it. I think the fan brush is a brush where it's kind of guilty of getting that same repeated pattern. But I also think that's why fan brushes work so great for tall coniferous trees. We have that sloping motion of that ditch that I was explaining. I use blue shop rag as my paper towel. I was watching a lot of David LaFell, who is a still life and portrait oil painter. I believe he's in his 80s. He has a company, and with videos, Bright Light Fine Art, I believe. Just fantastic videos with like a monthly fee. And watching him with his paintings, it's funny, I believe it was his wife that he would turn to near the end, and you'd hear him, "Oh, I only used one paper towel," and it was kind of, seems like it must have been some sort of inside joke between him and his wife, where paper towel consumption or something. And I forget what brand he used, a more common paper towel brand. These guys are the automotive section of Walmart. I'm just trying to pull where I feel the lighter sides would be. Let's go with the number 1 rigger, and we'll create some wet and wet branches and trunks. Now we're going to be passing over both wet areas and dry areas. Earlier, I experimented with wetting half the page and painting the sky wet and wet, then at a separate time painting the land wet and wet, and then when I put my trees in, I was crossing from wet and wet into the dry, and I would get a softening effect over the land masses with the trees, and then a crisp effect over the sky. It was an interesting experiment. I think that there's some potential uses for that. I also felt earlier that I wasn't really talking that much during the painting. This is the second painting of the day. I think I might have mentioned it's Saturday, and it's a week out from winter break, and work has been just absolutely exhausting. I teach a half-year course and a half-year course where the students will get a math credit the first half of the year, and then they'll get a math credit the second half of the year if they pass both courses. So it's been we're trying to wrap everything up while getting everything ready for the last week for them. Also, this year I've been teaching some freshman math classes, which it's really different, the maturity levels of freshmen versus juniors and seniors. And that can be exhausting. Now I'm putting in trunks back here, and I'm trying to be aware of the spacing between them. I really don't want the same space to take place. I want a variation, a rhythm. If you keep that in mind, variations, rhythms, a change in distances between your objects, that alone right there will help give more life to your object. Stuart Davies always refers to the illusion of detail, and that's a great way to quickly achieve it. Here's the number one rigger still, just playing around with the tree trunks. With all the moisture that I had pulled out with the paper towel, it is now in a slightly struggling phase where we are battling the drying of the paper. And speaking of moisture, today I had planned on setting up at a Christmas parade market, but all week I had been looking at the weather, and unfortunately with watercolors, they don't mix well with water. And just been watching the weather all week, and it's been predicted to rain, and unfortunately they're getting rain right now. But that doesn't stop the parade aspect and all that, so I'm sure they're all having plenty of fun. Just unfortunately I'm not able to display my paintings for them. Just dry brushing sideways, creating that downward slope. That darker edge. Some horizontal marks just for grass. And I've been holding the card in my hand, which I use to scrape. These are for the trees that are popping out against that background. I believe Rick S. has been using card scraping in his background in some videos. Stephen Cronin uses it quite a bit. David Usher and Joe Menza use the card scraping. It's just a really good, easy technique to incorporate. I know some of them use their fingernails, and I always forget about using the fingernail. But you could easily just go in with the back of your nail and create those marks. And to be honest, I'm not sure why I don't incorporate the fingernail as much, because I wind up getting paint on my hands anyway. You would think that I'd just go for it. But it's nice to learn what tools you could potentially use, what's available, and then hone in on what you like. And that'll help you create your own independent style. But on this other side of the coin, the same idea is that you can then potentially just pigeonhole yourself into the same painting over and over again. That's why I went through and pulled out a picture to paint from. So I felt like I've been doing that. So it may not be obvious to others, or it may be obvious, but that's what I felt like I was dealing with. I'm scraping on the background of this bridge, right on that other side of it, and we'll draw the bridge in a bit. It'll come across this way, it'll come down. That'll be our shape. Even scraping up this edge would help out. I could grab some burnt umber to get this darker. Burnt umber, let's get some sap green in there. Just the bottom, the water at the bottom of this. The cool thing about these little ditches and coulees is that you can find little tadpoles, crawfish, and other things in there. Turtles. That's always cool. Let's dry brush a little bit back here while we have this brush out. We had pulled up with the paper towel. It's perfectly fine to go back over it with more texture with now the brush. All right, let's see if there's anything else I want to scrape out. Oh, yeah, I was putting that in so I can then scrape my foreground over it. Now, in the painting, I think you'll see in the photograph how much green there is and how I'm just trying to avoid green. But here's a little bit of sap green. Bring up a little bit more life here, and more sap green back there. I'm sure you can mix in lemon yellow and play with some other colors, but trying to avoid that. All right. Now, let's see. Some burnt umber. We haven't done a dry off. Any dry off is coming from the lifting that took place and just everything preceding from that at that point. And just time. We'll do a dry off in a few. And paper towel in to mellow that down some. Get that edge a little bit darker. There we go. Feed a little bit. All right, I think at this point, a dry off is in order, and then from there, we'll play around and see what happens. Okay, I'm going to pause the camera, and we'll watch and see how things shift and lighten up. All right, so everything's pretty dried off. Now we are going to begin the next stage, and this is playing with just bringing darker values in and different textures. Let's go burnt umber, sap green, and just thinking about darkening the spot here. I'm using the side of the brush so that I'm not just putting the color in, that I'm just giving some texture as well. I mentioned painter David Usher. He is fantastic at using the side of the brush in this fashion. Alan Owen as well. Alan Owen has some great videos where he'll have a brush used on its side, a big mop brush, and very quickly in a swipe or two create foliage for the whole tree. It just looks perfect. Sometimes I experiment with taking my finger on the actual brush and pushing around. I'm sure that does some sort of damage to the brush, but I feel that sometimes if you baby a brush, your supplies, it might be restricting what you're doing. And of course there's art supplies that you have to baby, like the micron pens, the really thin tip ones. I always read about how people mash the ends of that, even if they brush, or sorry, mark really light with it. And this is a silver black velvet brush. I've had it for 3 years now. So if I was to damage it, I definitely got my use out of it. I know there's some brushes that are super, super expensive, and I can imagine wanting to be very careful with them. But I don't think I'm ever going to be using a $100, $200 brush. I'll leave that to the experts. Let's see. I want to put out some more raw umber. And we'll grab the hake. Let's go raw umber and sap green. I do find with the hake at this point, it's very easy to get repetitive with the stippling texture. So not just the texture, but the tonal value itself, where it just starts becoming one color, one blobby mass. So a few ways to counteract that is to change the density, to give yourself spaces between it. We're painting on top of a background, so we get the softness of that contrasting with what we're putting over it. And if worst comes to worst, we do have the paper towel, which we can then come in and change some of that tonal value by pulling some up. I think that these trees will wind up be given, I'll eventually give them a shadow portion. A little bit of horizontal marks for the grass. Give that sloping effect. And we'll try to capture the darker portion of the underleaves here. Perspective wise, I'm going to have to raise this side to help it come in perspective. So we see imaginary line drawn, imaginary line drawn. I think that is just something I have to add. And we could come in with the number one rigger. Now I think the video is getting longer than it usually paint, but I'm having a lot of fun and painting differently. Well, not so much differently, but from a photo. So I hope it doesn't irk y'all. Feel free to, follow along. Feel free to pause and save it. Sometimes I split them into 2 videos, but just on a roll right now. A fun challenge with a really enjoyable palette. Just to let it sit. There we go. Just weaving branches throughout. Just built up the scene more. We have the paper towel, we have our wet and wet that we put in, we have our scraping, and now we have these. Just all helps build up the scene. Darker side. Now we could probably look at that bridge. Do a mixture of burnt umber and Venetian red. Now the Venetian red's starting to pop. Let's see. I don't want one straight line. I want to vary it up. Now this is the top rail. And that top rail is going to go down on an angle a little bit as it's receding. So we have a line here, and an imaginary line in there. That's giving us the perspective lines. Around the edge. This one comes up. On the other side. Trying to grab some burnt umber into this mix, but there we go. Now I need this to sit in place. Help it sit in place. Let's grab some raw umber of our darker shadow color. Put the shadow in underneath. Hopefully that's helping. I know that probably doesn't sound confident painting and saying hopefully, but I'm having fun. And that, at the heart of it, is what matters. I'm just exploiting that raw umber for that edge of the grass. Darker portions coming down and bringing it over to that shadow. I think we can use for a dry off. All right, let's pause and we'll dry. Okay, so we're about 40 minutes in. I think I'll play around with one pass, just kind of tickling some spots, seeing if anything interesting comes out of any additions that could be added. I'm playing with the raw umber here, and one thing that's coming to mind is potentially using the razor blade to scrape out some highlights on the top of this bridge. I really did enjoy using this along this edge. I believe that it helped create that shadow. Paper towel. A little bit warmer shadow comparatively. Just forcing the perspective. I feel like this tree mass might be a little weak. See if there's anything we can do with that. Some sap green mixing in. Bringing some areas closer. sap green. This person's lawn is so well manicured that I feel bad giving it texture. With the light here, we would have a darker spot. This would be underneath a mat, but still. Let's grab the razor blade. Got some highlight spots. There we go. If you use a razor blade, please be careful. Let's see. I think we can at this point dry off and see if we're done. All right, so sap green, Venetian red, burnt umber, and raw umber work really well together. I hope you enjoyed. I'll have a download of the photo that I'm working from down below on my Patreon. I'll also have a photo of this, the result, if you want to compare the two on there. And I think with editing, I should have the two there for you to see. I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you all soon. Have a great day, and take care. Bye.